At 10 p.m., my partner and I were on our 12-hour night shift, a routine we were quite accustomed to. Most nights were peaceful, but this seemingly ordinary night turned out to be unforgettable. Suddenly, an emergency signal blared from our radio, shattering the night silence and snapping us back to reality. A homeowner, clearly very distressed, reported that a crazy woman was attempting to forcefully enter his home. His voice was filled with panic and helplessness as he described how he was struggling inside the door, trying to prevent this unknown intruder from entering. My partner and I exchanged a look, immediately sensing the urgency of the situation, knowing we had to act fast. Upon arriving at the alarmed residence, we immediately noticed the eerie quietness around, with no signs of anyone lurking or attempting to invade. I quickly grabbed a flashlight from the car and walked towards the front door of the house, each step taken with extra caution to avoid alerting any potential intruders hiding in the shadows. After knocking, it only took a moment before the door slowly opened. An old man with a hammer appeared at the door, his face etched with nervousness and fear. The flashlight beam caught the hammer in his hand, and I couldn't help but notice what seemed to be some red liquid on it, which instantly put me on edge. The old man seemed to relax a bit after seeing us in our police uniforms, but the panic in his eyes didn't completely disappear. He began to explain in a hurried, slightly trembling voice how he discovered someone trying to break into his home. To protect himself, he had locked all the doors, but felt he had no choice but to grab a hammer for self-defense when the person tried to enter through the back door. We listened carefully to the man's anxious narrative, trying to make sense of it, while my partner scanned the surroundings to assure there were no other potential threats. When the man told us the intruder had been knocked down at the back door, my partner and I became even more tense. After exchanging a glance with my partner, I decided to check the back door. I moved quickly yet cautiously, the flashlight beam cutting through the night, illuminating every corner ahead. As I approached the back door, my steps became even more careful to avoid making any noise that might startle anyone inside. The back door was ajar, letting through a sliver of light, indicating it might have been left open in the chaos. I gently pushed the door open, and a beam of light shot into the dark space, revealing a heart-pounding scene. On the cold floor lay an elderly woman, with a pool of blood spreading next to her head. Her breathing was weak and rapid, clearly having suffered serious injuries. I immediately called for emergency medical support over the radio. While waiting for the rescue team to arrive, I carefully approached the woman, attempting to administer first aid. I softly assured her that help was on the way while assessing her injuries to determine how best to provide assistance. Meanwhile, while I was checking the back door, my partner learned from the man that his wife had not yet come home, and he was worried. Combining this with the severely injured lady I had found, my partner immediately detained the man to ensure he couldn't cause any more potential harm. He tried to get more information from him to understand the full scope of the incident. However, the man was clearly in a state of confusion, his memory fragmented, which made us more certain that we were dealing with something more complex than a simple break-in. As the rescue team arrived, the tension reached its peak. The medical team acted swiftly and professionally, carefully lifting the woman onto a stretcher, ready for urgent transport to the hospital. Throughout, despite her immense pain, the woman showed incredible strength and courage, her voice weak but filled with comfort and encouragement. "Don't worry, child. I'm okay." The woman's true identity was quickly confirmed. She was none other than the man's wife. We learned that the man suffered from advanced dementia, a condition that had severely impacted his cognitive functions. On that night, when his wife returned home, he failed to recognize his companion of many years, mistaking her for a stranger intruding. In his confusion and panic, he attacked his wife with a hammer, leading to this tragic incident. This event left a profound impression on all of us. The woman eventually made a good recovery, while the man was placed in a medical facility where he could receive the appropriate care. It was around 11 p.m., and the cold night wind pierced through my uniform as I received a call about a disturbance. The information in the call was simple and direct. He was needed to investigate noise coming from a nearby house. I drove there, the city shrouded in a thin fog, with street-lights flickering weakly and the streets almost pitch black except for the bright light from my car's headlights. Upon reaching the specified address, I learned from neighbors, whose houses still had lights on, that the source of the noise was indeed the house they pointed out. They told me that a couple lived in the house and they had a history of frequent arguments, but tonight seemed particularly severe. The screams and arguments had now fallen into an ominous, prolonged silence. The lights in the house were all out, making it hard to tell if anyone was still inside. I cautiously approached the front door, my footsteps sounding exceptionally loud in the night silence. I gently knocked on the door, hoping for a response, but the echoes were hollow with no sign of life. Surprisingly, when I tried the doorknob, I found the door unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside quietly. The lights were off inside, with only the weak light from the street lamps outside filtering through the windows, creating a spooky atmosphere. I tried to turn on the lights, but the power in the entire house seemed to be cut off. I could only carefully make my way down the hallway from the entrance, trying to find any possible clues in the dark. Living room, kitchen, even the bathroom, you checked every corner of the first floor. I found nothing besides the heavy silence. Feeling the situation might be more serious than expected, I immediately called for backup over the radio, and then started to slowly make my way upstairs. With each step, the wooden boards under the stairs creaked, a sound especially piercing in the quiet night. I tried to calm my breathing, full of tension and uncertainty, but I knew I had to stay calm, prepare for whatever I might encounter upstairs. I carefully shone my flashlight down the hallway ahead, its beam cutting through the darkness, exposing every corner of the long hallway. Photos of the couple hung on the walls, seemingly telling stories of their sweet moments together. Now it seemed their story had taken a tragic turn. At the end of the hallway, the door was ajar with a faint light peeking through, guiding me forward. I reached the door, took a deep breath, and prepared for whatever I might find. Gently pushing the door open, a rust-like, bloody smell immediately hit me, making me frown. The scene inside the room froze before my eyes. A woman lay on the ground, surrounded by scattered furniture and a pool of blood spreading around her, and a man stood beside her, clenching a bloody knife. His body trembled slightly, his eyes full of fear and despair. I was stunned by the scene before me, having arrived right at the moment of the crime. I quickly assessed the situation, knowing I had to act immediately. I raised my gun, ordering the man to drop the weapon, ready to take further action if he made any sudden moves. Unexpectedly, the man seemed to realize his dire situation, his hands trembling, and then slowly, hesitantly, he dropped the knife. He suddenly fell to his knees, covering his face with his hands, beginning to sob. The emotions at that moment were complex, filled with both anticipation for the impending justice and mourning for the sudden tragedy. I didn't let my guard down, instructing the man to raise his hands and face the wall. I also checked on the girl. Although she seemed severely injured with a large pool of blood on the ground, she was still alive. With the arrival of backup, we quickly secured the scene, and the medical team cautiously took the girl to the hospital, while we took the man away from the tragic scene. While waiting for backup, I pondered what had led to all this. When we later learned that the couple had made a pact to commit suicide in a moment of emotional turmoil, the girl had chosen to slit her wrist with a knife, ending her life. After seeing his girlfriend bleeding profusely and falling down, the boy was overwhelmed with fear and regret. Unable to take any further action, just standing there dumbly until I arrived on the scene. Fortunately, although the girl had lost a lot of blood, she did not die. It might be that she didn't hit an artery correctly, and she ultimately survived the incident. On a dim autumn night, when most were deep in sleep, I, the newest officer in town, was tasked with investigating an old house long forgotten by time. The assignment stemmed from an anonymous call from a few children with shrill voices, claiming they had discovered a body in the basement of that old house before fear drove them to flee the scene. While children sometimes play pranks, such a situation wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. My heart was filled with apprehension, hoping this was just a false alarm. The streets under the night sky were eerily silent, accompanied only by the echo of my footsteps as I approached the old house. By the time I arrived at my destination, the night had deepened, and silence pervaded, broken only by the occasional bark of a distant dog. As I slowly stepped into the abandoned dwelling, my heart couldn't help but race. The feeble light from my only flashlight seemed all the more lonely amidst the endless darkness. Took a deep breath of the cold air, trying to calm my nerves, reminding myself I was just there to verify the situation. The house was filled with the musty scent of damp and the passage of time, each step on the floorboards creaking, as if protesting years of neglect and loneliness. I carefully navigated the living room where some worn-out furniture was placed, their silhouettes twisted and deepened by the flashlight beam. resembled silent ghosts standing guard. As I made my way toward the entrance to the basement, the air seemed to grow colder. I found the door to the basement, which was ajar as if it were an invitation or perhaps a warning. Taking a deep breath for courage, I pushed the door fully open and stepped down the stairs. With each step, the light grew dimmer, and my heartbeat quickened. I could hear my own breathing echoing in this enclosed space, a mix of fear and anticipation. Upon finally stepping into the basement, a dead silence enveloped me in darkness. Turning on my flashlight, its beam darted around the confined space, casting bizarre shadows. I moved slowly, each corner filled with the unknown. Rats scurried in a corner, adding to the eerie atmosphere of the scene. I carefully checked every possible hiding spot, opening every cupboard, hoping to find some clue while fearing something might suddenly appear. However, aside from some discarded items and thick dust, I found nothing. Just as I began to doubt whether I was here on a wild goose chase, I noticed the freezer. The freezer was placed at the deepest part of the basement, as if it was meant to be overlooked. Approaching it, the beam of my flashlight lingered slightly on it. It was an ordinary household freezer, but it felt out of place in such a setting. I reached out with trembling hands to open the freezer, and as I slowly lifted the lid, a pungent smell of decay immediately overwhelmed me, almost suffocating me. With the last ounce of courage, I shone the light deeper into the freezer, and the blurry outline of a male body came into my view, freezing me in place before the entire world plunged into darkness. The flashlight had completely run out of battery. In that moment, I felt the heavy atmosphere of sharing a room with that corpse. I fumbled my way back up the stairs, stumbling until I burst out of the haunting old house. Standing outside, the night wind brushed against my cheeks, yet I could still feel an unshakable shiver deep within. The night sky was devoid of stars, and the air carried an unprecedented chill. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heartbeat, but deep down I knew this experience would forever be etched in my memory. I quickly notified backup, waiting for my colleagues to arrive while standing outside the old house, filled with a newfound understanding of my job, the unknown. From that day on, I understood that as an officer, I must always be prepared to face the darkest corners of life and the secrets that lurk in the shadows.